There is a lonely farmhouse on a lonely road on a lonely island in the Irish Sea. Stone walls squat beneath constant wind. The grass leans in one direction, as if the whole landscape is bowing to something none of us can see. If you stand there long enough at dusk and hold your breath, you can hear the last birds circling the ridge and the old boards settling inside the cottage. And if you lived there in the early 1930s, you might have heard something else. A tapping in the walls. Then a chuckle. Then a voice that should not have been a voice at all. Welcome to Strange, where we look into the abyss and don't blink when it stares back. Today we're talking about one of the most famous English cases of the unexplained. GEF the Talking Mongoose. The house belonged to the Irving family. James, who people called Jim, was 58 at the beginning of the affair, a retired piano salesman who had decided to try his hand at farming late in life. His wife Margaret did the keeping of the house and the bridging of social distance with the neighbors. Their daughter, 15 at the start, was named Voirrey. They were ordinary people on a not very ordinary island, the Isle of Man, a small place with its own parliament, its own language once common in the fields, and its own stockpile of stories. The Irvings did not look for a story to keep. The story walked in and made itself at home. In 1931 the family began to hear rats in the walls. So they said. Scratching around the wood paneling. A clicking that felt too deliberate to be random. The farmhouse was old and had been expanded and paneled in a way that left swings of hollow space between the inner wood and the outer stone. The walls carried sound like a church carries prayer. The noises grew regular. Then they grew rhythmic. Jim Irving did the practical thing. He set traps and blocked gaps and carried on. The noises continued. He banged back with a brush handle. Tap. 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 The taps came back in the same count. Back and forth, until the counting turned to copying. He made a sound, and the sound answered, not like an echo, but like a companion. Soon the copycat tried syllables. Jim whistled. The thing in the wall whistled back. He sang. The wall sang in a thin little voice. It learned tunes that the Irvings knew. It learned to swear. It learned to mimic the tenor of each person in the house. Then, according to the family, it learned to speak. The first words were not elegant, but they were unmistakable. A voice as high as a child and as gravelly as a smoker said the word that mattered most. It said its name. GEF. The sound sits between a J and a G. They wrote it many ways in different clippings. GEF, who called himself a mongoose, and sometimes a man-weasel, and sometimes something else entirely. GEF claimed he was born in India in the year 1852. GEF claimed he could understand every language but preferred English and a kind of rough Manx. He announced that he was flesh and blood and then insisted that he was not. He bragged that he was an extra clever mongoose. He also grumbled that he was a freak. If you saw him, he said, you would faint and be turned to stone. He said he was a spirit in the form of a small animal. He said he was the eighth wonder of the world. He said many things, often contradictory, usually with relish. The contradictions became part of the charm and part of the bite. When he felt friendly, GEF guarded the house like a small watchdog that could speak. He warned the Irvings if strangers came up the track. He told them which farmer had a lame cow and which postman had a cough. He followed local gossip with the intensity of a village busybody who could slip through keyholes. He chased mice. He shouted at the cat. He shouted at the family too, with insults lifted from markets and pubs. He refused to be called a pet, but he demanded food like one. He asked for biscuits and bacon and chocolate and was particular about his milk. He agreed that he liked bacon fat on bread, and he liked it hot. He would take the treat through a crack in the paneling and scuttle away, laughing. When he liked the meal, he praised Margaret by name. When he did not, he let her know that she had failed. Neighbors began to know about the voice in the Irving house. The Irvings were not the kind of people to beat a drum. Yet little islands carry rumors as if they were family. People heard that a strange visitor had taken up residence out at Cashen's Gap. Some said it was a fairy. Some said it was a poltergeist. Some said it was the devil paying a call and disguising itself as a monkey or a stoat. The Irving place became a destination at night. A few visitors swore they heard the voice themselves. Some went away unsettled and quiet. Others walked off laughing and added new lines to the island's store of jokes. And then the newspapers came. That is how GEF traded one island for another. He traded the Isle of Man for the island of the British public mind. The clippings multiplied and sharpened. A talking mongoose had been reported in a farmhouse above Dalby, and it spoke, and it sang, and it made predictions, and it took care of the chickens. The family allowed interviews with select reporters and supporters, and refused those who smelled like trouble. A reporter could listen for hours and hear only the wind. A neighbor could stop by to borrow a tool and hear a hissed greeting from behind a wooden seam. The line between witnesses and believers grew thinner than paper. What made the story stick was not only the voice. It was the speed and personality of that voice. The thing was quick. It had timing. It was mean in funny ways. It offered details no one could verify but everyone wanted to repeat. The island police showed only polite interest. The island clergy were more uneasy. A voice that comes from a wall and delights in lying sounds like a familiar pattern to any priest. The voice sometimes gave the farmer useful information as if it were performing a small miracle of knowledge. The voice sometimes gave the farmer a headache by calling him a donkey and a nincompoop. It praised the daughter when the father scolded her, then mocked the mother when the mother prayed for strength. It wanted to be involved. It wanted to be loved and feared. It did not want to be ignored. Jim wrote down what happened each night. He began a running diary of noises and phrases and odd warnings about weather and visitors. He took photographs of the places where GEF said he had sat. He collected hairs that were caught in cracks and paw prints that appeared on dust and soft wood. He asked an expert to look at the hairs. The expert said they belonged to a dog. He asked an expert to study the prints. The expert said they looked like a small canine. The family did not own a dog. They did have a cat. The evidence never pulled in the same direction. It was never conclusive. It was exactly as slippery as a ghost with fur would want it to be. It made believers point at the mystery and skeptics point at the humans. By the time men in good hats and strong opinions arrived, the voice had built a small empire of rumors. One of those men was a captain who had spent time with British intelligence and knew what a trick sounded like. He listened carefully and said that he heard GEF speak with his own ears. On a later visit he tried to coax the creature out with bits of food and affection and got only jeers and the clatter of the paneling. Another of the visitors was a celebrated investigator of mediums. He had tangled with fake materializations and with table rappers who hid wires under carpets. He was at home around ectoplasm and fraud. He traveled to the island with a colleague who could take careful notes. They studied the house, not as believers and not as sworn enemies, but as curious professionals. They saw that the paneling created a system of accidental tubes that carried sound through angles in the rooms. They saw that a voice could be thrown from one corner to another without much practice at all. They examined the samples and paw marks and did not find a mongoose in them. They left less impressed than they had hoped to be. They published a report that many people read and forgot, because it did not change much. Those who had chuckled at the first headline still chuckled. Those who had stood outside in the cold to hear the voice still stood there, and now they had more to argue about. The strangest visitor was a psychoanalytic ghost hunter. A man who believed that haunted places show us haunted minds. He did not catch GEF either. He did not hear the creature deliver one of its famous quips. He left with a theory rather than a trophy. He suspected that the creature that spoke from the walls was not an animal and not a spirit, but a piece of a person, split off and given a clever mask. He thought that the family's isolation and the father's disappointments and the daughter's hidden talents might have made themselves into something real enough to throw a voice sharp enough to wound. A voice that gave the house a roll when the island ignored it. A voice that pulled outsiders across the water. A voice that made an ordinary farm into a theater. The theory did not convince everyone and did not need to. It is hard to chase a story that refuses to stand still. Shuffle through the facts and you can make different patterns out of the same pieces. The family heard scratching, which sounded like rats. The scratching became speaking, which sounded like a trained voice at a distance. The speaking became a character, which sounded like a child given costumes and time. The experts who visited were split in their instincts. The animal people did not find an animal. The psychical people did not find a ghost. The crowd found exactly what the crowd always finds. It found the story it wanted. What cannot be argued away is the style of GEF. For years he spoke in rhythms and wisecracks and threats. He claimed to kill rabbits and demanded a share of the stew. He went out into the hills and returned with gossip that made the local postman very nervous. He claimed to read minds and sometimes got lucky with a remark that fit the moment too well. He resisted commands and responded with insults. When someone tried to turn him into an experiment, he became a heckler. He said that he was not a tame mongoose and not a tame ghost and not a tame anything. He usefully told the farmer when a fox had been near the chicken coop. He uselessly told the farmer what words people had used in town when they discussed him. It is easy to picture a teenage girl behind a panel teasing her father and teasing the island. It is also easy to picture an animal making a sound that we mishear, because humans love to turn strange calls into words. It is also easy to picture a small spirit in a nuisance mood, who likes bacon fat and arguments in equal measure. The more you try to pick a single picture, the more the other pictures crowd you out. The power of the case lives in that jam. You cannot settle into one answer without feeling a tug from another. The farmhouse helped. The paneling inside many rooms left runs of empty space where a sleek body could coast unseen. The knots and joints offered peepholes for a small pale eye. A voice placed inside those hollows would ride the wood like a flute rides air. It would arrive in an unexpected place with an unexpected timbre and cause a listener to spin around, looking for a mouth. Sometimes the family placed food on a saucer by a certain crack, and sometimes the food went missing and could not be found in the space behind. That is a fact that speaks in both directions. It can be a helpful gremlin. It can be a trick with a trained animal. It can be a child's hand in a dark scene moving fast enough to matter. As the case grew famous, the town of Peel and the villages nearby became both embarrassed and delighted. You do not want your neighbors to think you are a force of superstition. You also do not turn down a little attention. The local bus driver gave opinions to anyone who asked. The local school children collected stories of the night GEF sang a song that none of them knew. Farm boys claimed to see a small shape run between gorse bushes and stop and tilt its head in a very human way. Others claimed the whole business was the work of an eccentric father who had found a way to make his life interesting again. Along the lane above the cliffs, the cold wind tore newspapers from people's hands while they waited for a smart remark from a mongoose that had once claimed to be born when the mutiny still haunted British headlines. Jim took to sleeping lightly, since GEF liked to wake him and complain about the mattress or the quality of the milk. The voice talked to Voiri more than to anyone else. It complimented her when she practiced the piano and sniped at her when she sulked. It insisted that she draw it. She once did, quick strokes showing a long body and a pointed face and a tail with a little plume. He did not look like a dog. He did not look like a cat. He looked like a mongoose as a child would describe it, though very few on the island had ever seen a mongoose in the flesh. That animal had been imported to British colonies to eat snakes. India had them. The Isle of Man did not. In one telling, the voice explained itself with a story about being born in India, shipped to a zoo, and then wandering through routes that made no sense until it found itself far from the heat of its childhood. In another telling, the voice brushed off questions about any true shape and claimed to be a spirit pretending to be a small beast because people prefer to laugh at a beast rather than tremble at a ghost. The best lines from the case read like an improv routine performed by an angry comedian on a stool. He told them that he was weak and that he was powerful. He told them that he was a liar and that he would never lie to them again. He threatened to bite and he promised to be good. And no matter what else he was fast. When investigators asked the family to set up tests, the tests mostly failed to put a net on the creature. The little holes that led into the paneling were sealed and then mysteriously reopened. The rooms that had carried voices so well fell silent for hours and then exploded with foul language when the men packed up their notebooks. The house seemed to obey the one rule that haunted houses obey. It moved when it wanted to move, and only then. There is a photograph of the farmhouse in that era that gets reprinted in articles about the case. The stone looks exhausted. The thatch is gone. The roof sits like a cap on an old man. In the yard there is a makeshift bench of thick boards where you can imagine Jim sitting and rolling a cigarette while the day ends. Inside the boards, the air is cool and the paneling has been rubbed by countless shoulders. I have a picture in my mind of that interior. The particular shade of brown. The smell of smoke and salted meat and soap. The smell of animals that have been inside and out, because a hard winter never respects a threshold. A small thing scurries, or a small girl laughs, or a voice finds a sweet spot in the wood and a punch line in the air. You have to decide which you will believe. You will fail to decide, and that failure will keep you. The little island was part of a larger empire of newsprint, and so the story jumped to London. Magazine writers who dealt in marvels and frauds gave it space. Some of them wanted to prove the case and some wanted to bury it. In both directions they were animated by the same hope. They hoped the story would make them a name. A paradox sat at the center of their work. Every investigator added to the legend even as he tried to exterminate it. Print likes a voice. When the voice is a mongoose in a wall, print becomes giddy. Comedy grew on the edges like lichen. Sketches at music halls included a high voice from under a table that told a lady to mind her hatpins. Pubs named a small drink after the creature. You could order a little something for courage and pretend that a polite animal in the baseboards was listening. The Irvings must have felt the lift and the insult. On one hand, the newspapers sent money. On another, the family's house had become a punch line. They were the people with the mongoose. You do not shake a nickname that tight. As the months turned to years, the performance continued. GEF came and went. Sometimes he was quiet for days and then returned angry, as if insulted that anyone had doubted he would return. He recited prayers with a mocking cadence. He demanded gifts at Christmas. He flirted with the daughter and snarled at the father. He practiced a kind of favoritism that created rifts in the family and then exploited them with jokes. He claimed that he knew when neighbors lied to the Irvings, and he listed the lies. The neighbors denied that they had said those things. The farmers knew the danger in that kind of ventriloquism. A little story can crack a friendship the way a frost cracks an old step. Sometimes the voice admitted that he was a hoax and laughed at the people who came to catch him and failed. Then, in the next hour, he would swear by God that he was real and had never deceived Jim and that he would prove it if only they would trust him for a moment. The promise of proof never survived the night. Once, long after the first tapping, the family claimed that GEF had allowed a photograph. The picture that resulted looks like a small creature on a fence with edges that do not match any known species perfectly. The picture traveled with the story, though few people trusted it. It was like everything else in the case. It almost sealed the matter and then refused to do so. You can live that way for a season. You cannot live that way forever. The center of gravity in the house moved as the daughter grew and the visits slowed. Jim's health did not improve. Money did not grow easier. The island did not forget, but the island did move on to other scandals. The voice still complained when it felt ignored. It still delighted in eating scraps and taunting cats and calling people names that would make a vicar wince. Yet it was less and less of a storm and more of an echo. Then came the end that sounds like the ending of many hauntings. In the mid-1940s, the father died. The women stayed on for a while and then left the house. The talking stopped. The farmhouse changed hands. People reported a silence like the silence that arrives after a performance in which the audience is not sure it has seen anything. They walked through the rooms and they could not find the place where the voice could be made to live again. Years later, a journalist tracked down Voyery, who had built a life away from the farm and away from the long winter of jokes. She did not confess to a trick. She did not claim to have thrown her voice in the service of a bored father. She said that GEF was real, that the case had cost her privacy and comfort, and that she was tired of people who pretended to know better than her what she had heard and seen. In that version of the little afterlife, the girl at the heart of the story refuses to become a stock character. She refuses to be either the ventriloquist or the victim. She insists on the third option that haunts all good mysteries. She insists that it happened. The investigators who wrote books wrote them in their own voices. The hard-headed ghost hunter in the double-breasted suit and the careful journalist presented a volume with precise descriptions of the farmhouse. They described the panels and the spaces behind them and the way a voice could arrive from a corner and surprise even a person who knew the trick. They did not catch the creature. They did not solve the case. They nudged readers toward an ordinary explanation that came dressed in good manners. It is a house of wood and a family of 3. Wood carries sound. A family carries secrets. A lonely place carries a need for company. The result is a voice that perches on the edge of plausibility until you choose which way to lean. The psychoanalytic ghost hunter wrote a theory that used Freud as a lantern and followed a path that felt true to him. He believed that the mind of the farmer had split and leapt into the walls. He believed that the household made that leap into an art. He believed that a poltergeist is a mood that turns into furniture and noise. He believed the young woman at the heart of the house had found a voice that said things no one else could say. He believed the island had listened because the island was bored and the island was hungry. He believed that after the father died, the story lost its source of fuel and faded. He believed the case told him more about people than about animals. Decades pass. A person today hears the name GEF and knows either nothing at all or too much. If you know nothing at all, the shock of a talking mongoose is sweet. If you know too much, the arguments in your head begin before the story does. Either way, you find yourself in a landscape that is still windy. People who love the case have kept the files warm. 1,000 websites retell the same handful of details, sometimes with quotes that sound too good to be true because they are, and sometimes with quotes that are exactly as odd as the originals. People who hate the case wave a hand and say that ventriloquism is common and hoaxes crave attention and isolated families get strange. The best writers on the subject tend to grant both sides their basic point. A trick is possible. A trick is not proven. A haunting is possible. A haunting is not proven. What is certain is that a 1930s farmhouse on a Manx ridge became a stage for a voice that knew how to keep an audience. I keep coming back to the meals, not the jokes. The little mouth in the wall asked for food, and the mother cooked, and the father delivered, and the daughter listened. There is an intimacy to that routine that holds more power than a headline about a ghost. The family fed something they could not see, and in return it gave them company and spectacle and trouble. It is a perfect exchange for a lonely place. You lose a little bacon fat. You gain a little noise. But the noise grows its own appetite. The local timing of the case matters. The island was not immune to the same weakness that ran through the wider country. The early 1930s brought worry to family doors. Money was thin. Farmers did not pick up and go elsewhere so easily. Isolation hardened people in some ways and softened them in others. Stories were a form of warmth. A house that gave stories became a shelter for strangers who wanted to share a fire and pretend the world was more interesting than milk prices and weather forecasts. Out on the headlands the sea stayed dark and the gulls stayed loud in every season. You can imagine the sound of a human voice from inside a wall pleasing the part of a person that once marvels to intrude on chores. The case also arrived at a time when spiritualism had not yet surrendered its ground to a brutal new century. The wars had brought so much grief that many families knew seances as a kind of medicine. Mediums had followers, and debunkers had readers, and both moved through the same drawing rooms. A talking animal fit nicely in that space, since it asked for laughter first and then for belief. It was a gateway phenomenon. Mock the gullible without scaring your children. Poke fun at a farmer without pressing your thumb on his grief. Touch the strange without quite touching death. GEF became a mascot for that urge. He filed the rough edges off grief and replaced them with a chattering trickster. The deep unease in the story is not that a family lied. The deep unease is that an island wanted them to lie for a while. The case gave people a way to measure themselves against each other. The vicar could tut and talk about deceit. The newspaperman could spin the next paragraph. The curious could go out by bicycle after supper and tell themselves they were trying to hear something. Then, when they came home empty-handed, they had a small adventure to report. Even the investigators took their turns inside that wind. They stood in rooms that smelled of coal and potatoes and waited for a voice that never once forgot how to miss its entrance when it wanted to. If you stand now above the site and listen, the field keeps its own counsel. The farmhouse is gone. The stones remain in low walls that mark small claims on the land. You can look toward the sea and think about a small thing sliding through a slit in a board and stealing off with a crust. Or you can think about a young woman with a gift for mimicry and a house that made every word she threw come back to her in a new shape. Or you can think about a ghost with humor. There are not many of those in the files. Most hauntings sulk or rage. This one developed a routine. I like to imagine what GEF would say now if given a microphone and a studio audience. He would say that he told the truth and that anyone who says otherwise is the son of a turnip. He would quote the Bible incorrectly and then sing a verse from a popular song that went out of fashion the year before the case began. He would demand bacon fat on toast and then ask for chocolate and demand it in a way that made no one feel safe around their groceries. Then he would say that he has to go because something important is happening in a neighbor's kitchen, and besides, this island is boring and he deserves a bigger market. He would say that he will be back. He would probably not return. That is the shape of the story. Promises and absences and a lingering grin. What do we do with it now? We can tease the past for swallowing a hoax, or we can tease ourselves for being no better, no worse, and no less hungry for a good line. We can treat the case as a poltergeist classic, a model for how attention can erupt inside a family like a brush fire that clears the ground and then goes out. We can treat it as a quaint bit of folklore about a creature far from home, who learned local slang and could not resist a good argument. We can do both and still feel the chill when we picture that paneling and the small hole where the voice breathes. The everyday setting is what makes the story feel wrong. Potatoes in the pot. Wind through the eaves. Curtains that need a wash. And then a sentence from a mouth that is not a mouth. There are lines that stick with me. Not because I know who said them, but because I know how they land. I am a little clever mongoose. I am a ghost in the form of something that makes you laugh. I am real when you listen and I am not real when you test me. I like milk with a skin on it. I will tell you who stole your eggs. I know the names you call each other when you think you are alone. I am the person in your house who gets to say what no one else can say. I am born in a hot country and now I live where the wind never rests. I am older than your father and younger than your daughter. I am only a trick. I am not a trick. I am the best worst thing that has happened to you. A case like this tempts a host to declare a verdict, to stake a claim, to be the adult in the room. Here is the truth. If you need the truth to be a spot of ventriloquism and a few nights of petty fraud, you will find material to confirm that instinct. If you need the truth to be a haunting that hid itself as a small beast, you will find lines that satisfy that appetite. If you want a third way, the psychoanalytic curve, the family mind theory, you can make a map from that too. But the more you chase a straight line, the more the story curls. That is the only verdict I trust. So let us give the last word to the landscape. The Isle of Man is a place where roads keep secrets and farm walls outlast families. The farm at Cashen's Gap sat on a ridge that sees storms early and keeps them late. A man bought it and tried to make it a life. A woman kept it clean. A girl grew inside its boards. Then a voice appeared. Perhaps they made it. Perhaps it found them. Perhaps both are true in a way that only makes sense to the part of us that understands hunger, and jokes, and rooms that carry sound like a living thing. The voice demanded bacon fat and attention. The family paid what they could. The island paid what it wanted to pay, in gossip and jokes and a little cruel joy. The world paid with column inches. Then winter after winter took what winter always takes. The voice faded. The house changed hands. Time got to do the thing it prefers to do. It moved on without explaining itself. And yet here we are, telling the story again. If that is not a kind of haunting, I do not know what is. A small creature with a high voice that liked to listen at keyholes and break into song continues to borrow our attention. A father with a habit of writing everything down still hands us notes from his table. A daughter who did not want to be a character continues to be cast in roles by people who never met her. An island with its own stubborn silence endures while the wind smudges old paths. A talking mongoose strides along the top of the wall and smiles at our need to decide whether he is a joke or a sign. He is neither. He is a story with teeth. If you ever visit the island and walk up the track toward where the farmhouse stood, you might feel foolish for expecting anything at all. That is fair. Foolishness is part of the fee. Stand there anyway. The wind will come across the ridge. The grass will bend. You will think about a night when a family heard tapping in the walls and then a whistle and then a song. You will think about a voice that kept them company and kept them on edge for years. You will think about all the investigators who tried to bottle that voice and carry it home and could not. Then listen, not for a laugh, but for the possibility that makes all hauntings work. The possibility that something is in the room with you that loves attention and hates being known. If you hear nothing, count yourself lucky. If you hear a chuckle, count yourself warned. If you hear a small request for bacon, fat and bread, you have a choice to make. Feed it and it will be yours for a time. Refuse it and it will learn a new house to haunt. Either way, when you walk back down the lane and the sea comes into view and the lights on the coast line up like pearls, you will realize that you have done what the island asked you to do. You have carried the story with you. You have become another small tube in a larger speaking wall. This is strange. Tonight we listened to a voice that should not have been a voice at all, and we let it say what it wanted to say. Somewhere, I hope, it is pleased. Somewhere, it is rolling its small eyes and telling me I got the dates wrong and the punchlines right. Somewhere, it is still hungry. Next time, we present the Patterson-Gimlin film with a special